Naval Ravikant is a successful businessman, investor, philosopher of sorts who recently went on Chris Williamson's podcast, Modern Wisdom. It's one of the most important podcast episodes I've listened to in a long time. So important that I actually listened to it several times, and I took down every single sentence from the entire 3-hour conversation that struck me as important. I had 137 sentences. I whittled it down, ironically, to 44 because I totally forgot this, but the title of the actual podcast with Chris Williamson is 44 Harsh Truths or something. I, at the end of my podcast prep, realized that that's the exact same amount of sentences that I had from the podcast. So perhaps that's an insight or synchronicity into the importance of some of these ideas. But in this podcast, we're going to go over the 44 most important sentences and ideas from their conversation and how we can apply the lessons to our lives to become better entrepreneurs, better family members, better husbands, better fathers, better friends, better members of our community, and ultimately become more sovereign. So, hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. And actually, before we go any further, I forgot to mention that I'll break these down. I broke these down into like 6 or 7 different sections, depending on what the advice or the sentence is related to. So this one is sovereignty, mastery, and freedom. Some of the sentences and ideas will overlap, but they're general frameworks. This is sovereignty, mastery, and freedom. Sentence number 1, the overscheduled life is not worth living. This is something that Warren Buffett also lives by. There's many people that live by, but I don't believe Warren Buffett has a real schedule. Sam Walton from Walmart was notoriously scatterbrained and would miss meetings and would have to cancel meetings late. There's one story about Sam Walton where his secretary had somebody come in to meet with him in the morning, like 8:30 or something. The guy's, and she gets into the office, and this guy's on his way in the morning, only to find that Sam got in his plane and flew somewhere at 5 a.m. that morning and didn't tell anybody. So he was notorious for that as well. But Naval's point here is that you can become a slave to a schedule. There's very little room for serendipity or for God to work in your life if you control every second of your life, or if it's overly scheduled. That is not to say that you should not schedule, you should not use a calendar. I think that there's immense value in keeping a good watch on what you're doing and how your days play out, and making sure that you're doing the work that you need to do in a structured way. And I think routine and habit and ritual and tradition are important, but there's nuance to it. Naval is saying the overscheduled life is not worth living. Something to think about. You have to create room for serendipity. Maybe that means scheduling time to do nothing. I don't know. Sentence number 2, there are 2 paths to success. Get what you want or don't want it. And this reminds me of a quote. I don't know the exact verbiage, but it's something to the effect of freedom is not in the satisfying of your desires, but in the controlling of them. And the idea that not wanting something is a form of freedom. Maybe we think so. We live in a very consumer-driven, material-driven world, but you actually don't really want everything that you think you want. We are advertised to nonstop. We see people with certain things on social media, cars, technology, clothes, everything you can possibly imagine. You actually do not want everything that you think you want, and not wanting something is a form of freedom. Getting clear on what it is that you don't want allows you to not think about it because you don't want it, and that's very important. There's also an idea that the reason that you play a game is to win. So winning a game is really a simple definition of success. The reason that you play the game or hope to be successful is to be finished with that game, to free yourself of it. I just think that's a really important lesson, because not many people, we always think about what we want. What are some goals? What are the things you want to achieve? What is the car that you want to drive? What's the house that you want to live in look like? All of the things that you want. Very rarely do we sit back and think about all the things that we don't want and get crystal clear on those. Because say there's like 100 things going on in your mind that you maybe kind of want, but then you get really clear and you decide, actually, I don't want 78 of those 100 things. That frees up an immense amount of bandwidth and space and time and energy and focus and resources to focus on the 22 things that you really do want. That's a really important idea. Take some time, sit back. I've done this literally since I heard this podcast. I took some time, sat back, thought about the things that I did not want, and I'm going to continue to get more clear and clear on that, because then you can just be free of them, because not wanting something is a form of freedom. Sentence number 3, your natural order is freedom. This reminds me of perhaps the most influential and impactful quote that I've heard in the last year, maybe even longer than that. It's by a guy named Sam Zell, and the general gist is this: go for freedom, because if you go for freedom, you can control what you work on. If you control what you work on, you'll do what you love. If you do what you love, you'll do it for a long time. If you do it for a long time, you'll get really good at it, and if you get really good at something, money will come. That is one of the most profound ideas. Sam Zell was a multi-billionaire as well. Obviously, he said that at the end of his life or towards the end of his life, but I think that's really, really important. If you go for freedom, you'll do what you love, and in the end, money will come, and you'll spend your life doing something you actually enjoy doing. So I just think that's a really powerful idea. Naval said, your natural order is freedom. Sentence number 4. Most older, successful people will tell you that their life was best lived when they lived it unapologetically on their own terms. Be selfish. And these are not direct quotes. Some of them are direct quotes, but they're very close to the idea or the actual sentence that Naval and Chris were talking about. But this one in particular, very interesting, because he goes on to say, Chris describes Naval as almost unapologetically self-prioritizing, which perhaps is a pretty diplomatic way of saying selfish, but it's very nuanced, because if I spend my life doing things that drain me as a human being, if I spend my life in a job or in a relationship or a place or just the day-to-day of my life I don't actually like, that's a pretty miserable life. And that's not to say you don't make sacrifices, but I think the real thing to think about here is pick and choose your sacrifices. Because if you live on your terms, you can pick like, okay, well, I really want this, and I understand that having a family and having a successful marriage comes with this sacrifice and this sacrifice and this sacrifice. Then I can actually delineate what sacrifices I want to make. But if you are not living life on your terms, or if you're just completely at the whim of other people, or you haven't taken the chance or gone for freedom, as Sam Zell would say, you don't even get to pick your sacrifices, which in my opinion is not a good place to be. The other idea relevant to this sentence is that a cup that is empty cannot overflow, meaning unless my cup is full, unless I'm vital, unless I'm energized, unless I'm motivated, unless I'm inspired, unless I'm passionate, then I can't give those things to other people. At least not to the same degree that I could. I mean, we've all done it. We've talked to people that like something about them, they're just in flow, where it's like they are oozing with charisma and energy and passion, and we can't help but gain some of that same passion. So the empty cup cannot overflow. Very important. Number 5, the biggest mistake in a world with so many choices is premature commitment. We'll get into this a little bit later, because this is also one of the most profound ideas in the podcast. We live in a world where there are so many options. A good example of this is dating. So back in the day, let's say 100 years ago, you didn't have social media, you didn't have MySpace, you didn't have Hinge or Tinder or any of these dating apps. Most people didn't travel that much, so your dating pool was small. You had a limited amount of options. Sometimes, even today this is the case, but in a small town, let's say, you have a dating pool of, let's say, 100 women that are around your age. And so, naturally, you have a constraint that refines your possibilities in the dating pool. Today, you go on Instagram, you're exposed to thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of not only just women, but you're exposed to thousands and thousands of some of the prettiest women across the world that are also basically editing themselves online. It's an example of an immense amount of opportunity. Naval is saying the biggest mistake is to prematurely commit in a world of infinite opportunity, because it's a blessing to have a lot of opportunity and a lot of choice. But the problem is that most people don't actually explore. They commit a lot of people, commit prematurely, and they come to regret it. And I think this is also nuanced. Much of what Naval says is very nuanced. But if you explore diligently, then you commit fully. So if you explore diligently and thoroughly and with intention, then you commit fully. I think that's a good framework to go. The biggest mistake in a world with so many choices is premature commitment. I also think that stems back to the idea that just being intentional about what commitments you make, because there's a verse that says something to the effect of, it is better to not make a vow before the Lord than to make one and not live up to it, essentially. So it's better to not commit to something than to commit to it and then not fulfill that commitment. Number 6, if you can't decide, the answer is no. Most things you should be saying no to. This is a powerful idea because there's so many opportunities. And if you say yes to everything, you're actually saying no to everything, because you can't, definitionally, if you say yes to everything, then you're not fully committed to anything. There is immense power in saying no to the party you don't actually want to go to the trip that you don't actually want to go to the dinner that you don't actually want to go to the business opportunity that's distracting you from the thing that you know you need to be doing or that you really want to do. There is immense power in saying no, and I think that's a skill that we can cultivate. Saying no, I don't think you need to be rude about it, but just being intentional about what you spend your time, energy, and focus on. It is, one, it's okay to say no, and two, it's actually very important, and it's very powerful to be able to say no in a graceful and committed way. It shows what you're committed to. Number 7, if you have two choices that seem equal, choose the path that seems more painful in the short term. This is another paradigm for decisiveness and making decisions quickly, because most of the time, gain in general, long-term gain, is the price for that is short-term pain. There's some level of sacrifice that has to come on the front end to have long-term gain. This idea or this paradigm emphasizes or is biased to long-term gain, because if you have two equal choices and you choose the one that's less painful, that's obviously going to be better in the short term. Almost exclusively, almost always will be worse in the long term. Whereas vice versa, if you choose the decision that's more painful in the short term, very likely you will be better for it in the long term, and you will receive a more bountiful reward. There's another verse, I think this is Proverbs. It's in Proverbs. King Solomon says, "An inheritance easily gained is not blessed in the end." With that in mind, you don't want to not earn the things that you have. You know what I mean? Like, when you look at yourself in the mirror when you're 80 years old and you're about to die, if you knew in your heart that you didn't earn the things that you have, what a worthless sensation. What a worthless way to feel. That sucks. I absolutely would hate to have that feeling. I would love to look myself in the mirror and know, you know what? I worked extremely hard. I sacrificed. I accepted the pain that was a prerequisite of this gain, and I genuinely feel that my work and my diligence has paid off because of in a fair way. Whereas if you look at yourself at 80 years old and you're like, I didn't work for anything, I lied, I cheated, that's an awful place to be. So if you have two choices that seem equal, choose the path that seems more painful in the short term. Number 8, at some point, you have to cut your past. You can choose to move on. I believe this. And he goes on to talk about therapy, and I cut it out because I don't think it's like a super important part of the podcast, but you can just choose to move on from your past. You can acknowledge that it happened, but you can just choose to move on. I think there was this idea that Ben Wilson and David Sinner just had a podcast together, the host of the How to Take Over the World podcast, who I've had on Becoming Sovereign, episode 96 or 7. And then David Sinner, the Founders podcast. They were talking about Steve Jobs, or they were actually just talking about great leaders in general, how many of them are just reflexively not introspective. They just don't think about the past that much, a lot of them. And Steve Jobs, the example they raised was Steve Jobs got asked a question about like his childhood or something. And he just said, honestly, haven't thought much about it. It wasn't like, oh, yes, that really affected me, or that didn't affect me at all. He's like, I haven't really thought much about it. And I think there's a major lesson there, because you can choose to just move on. At a certain point, you can just choose to cut your past out. If you don't like who you were, if you don't like where you live, if you don't like what you were doing, you can just choose to move on. And that doesn't mean don't repent or don't apologize if you've wronged people. I think that's actually part of moving on. But you can choose to move on from your past. I think that's a powerful lesson. Number 9, you should cultivate indifference to things out of your control. This is a pretty stoic belief. It's actually prevalent in Stoicism and Christianity and Buddhism, as far as I understand. I'm not sure about other religions, but the idea that worry never added a day to anybody's life, not a single one. Naval goes on to say in the podcast that you should not take on problems that you can't affect. If you cannot affect it, then why would you identify it as a problem? Because then it's just a problem in your head that you can't that you can't affect, that you're ineffectual in dealing with it. And the better way to do that, similar to what we were talking about at the beginning, is to just not identify it as a problem, or not choose to spend any time or energy or resources even thinking about it. If you have no effect on it, it should be out of your mind. You should cultivate indifference to things that are out of your control. There's an element of faith there too, that things end up in your favor. That if this thing that I have no control over exists, but I can't impact it, then you have to surrender yourself. In my opinion, I think the best way to do that is just to surrender the outcome to God and trust that his promises are true and that he will guide you exactly where you need to be, exactly through the things that you need to go through, and everything else will take care of itself. But you should cultivate indifference to things out of your control. Number 10, if you take yourself too seriously, you'll get trapped in a limited set of behaviors and outcomes that keep you from being free. Don't take yourself too seriously. There was a description in Edmund Morris's biography of Teddy Roosevelt, The Rise of Teddy Roosevelt, where he said he was utterly unselfconscious. And I love that word. I love that description. He was utterly unselfconscious. He just like we were talking about, he wasn't necessarily introspective about what people thought or how he was being perceived. He didn't take himself too seriously. And there's obviously a little bit of nuance here, but I think the idea of building your tolerance for looking foolish is I think it's a superpower. I really do. Like, if you can just be totally, completely okay looking like a fool because you decide to start something that you're not good at, or you decide to embark on a new journey or a new skill, or maybe it's you go to jiu-jitsu for the first time and you're like, I have no idea how to do jiu-jitsu, but I'm okay looking like a fool. The other thing is, it's kind of arrogant in a way. I've dealt with this before, where it's like, it's arrogant to assume that I'd be really good or professional at something that I've never done. Jiu-jitsu is a great example. When I walked in the jiu-jitsu gym the first time, I have never in my life felt like more of an absolute idiot. I had no idea how to tie my belt. I had no idea how to put a gi on. I had no idea how to do a shrimp or a tech stand, or I had no idea how to line up. I literally had no idea how to do anything. And I think that that's a powerful lesson, because the more you look foolish, the more you learn. And I really do believe that's a superpower. The other thing to note, to a degree, if you are earnest and genuinely curious, I think mentors and people that are ahead of you are more willing and more likely and more compelled to help you along in your journey if you come across as humble. But if I just started in jiu-jitsu and I thought that I knew everything, or if I just started in business and I thought that I knew everything, why on God's green earth would somebody that's farther ahead of me want to help me if I'm acting arrogantly in respect to my skill? It's nuanced, because you obviously want to be confident and you want to have belief and self-esteem, but I think that the ability to tolerate looking foolish or to be utterly unselfconscious is a superpower in most contexts. Don't take yourself too seriously. Number 11, we're on to the advice that relates to action, discipline, and learning or iteration. Number 11, the people who are extraordinarily successful didn't sit around watching success porn. They just went and did it. This reminds me of one of my favorite aphorisms of all time. John D. Rockefeller said, action solves everything. Action solves everything. Watching cool Instagram edits or cool YouTube videos doesn't solve everything. Creating a mood board and constantly adding pictures to your mood board doesn't solve everything. Talking about doing what you want to do is not going to solve everything. It's not going to get you any closer to doing what you want to do. There's a lot of mental masturbation. I think that's what he's getting at. There's no substitute for action. And he goes on to say, you don't need mentors, you need action. Which obviously there's nuance to it. These are pungent, or not pungent, but poignant statements that he's making, I think intentionally, because they pack more of a punch. But you don't need mentors, you need action. What I think we all need is to just take more action. I think we just need to take more action in the direction that we want to go, and the rest is history. We'll get more feedback. We'll be able to make more decisions, have better, more productive, and higher leveraged action, which improves our results, which improves our feedback, and then it's this never-ending cycle of improvement. But you have to take action first. You don't have to watch another Instagram video from Alpha Motivation. Nothing wrong with those pages, but they don't move the needle at all. The people who are extraordinarily successful didn't sit around watching success porn. They just went and did it. Number 12, it's not 10,000 hours to mastery. It's 10,000 iterations to mastery. Iteration is not repetition. Repetition is doing the same thing. Iteration is error correction. And there's this paradigm I've been thinking about a lot recently. And I kind of got it from Jeff Bezos's quote that big winners pay for many failed experiments. The idea is that you fail and then you learn, and then you fail and then you learn, and then you fail and then you learn, and you fail and you learn over and over and over again until you learn so much that you attempt and then you win. And then when you win, the payout of the reward is 100 times the cost of those failures. So big winners pay for many experiments, and you fail, learn, and then you win so big that it pays for every failure. The other important thing is that repetition is not improvement. Repetition is doing the exact same thing over again. Iteration is error correction. And Naval on the podcast says that all learning is essentially error correction. Learning is not being able to recite a quote or recite a part of a book. And I understand fully the irony of me literally reading books and then talking to you about them. But that's why I'm saying this. It's convicting to me to not just let this be conjecture that I talk with my friends about, or that I talk with you about, or that we study. Use the information that we gain to actually iterate, to change something, to correct an error in our lives so that we can actually improve. It's 10,000 iterations to mastery, not hours. Number 13, define your primary problem and invest your energy and focus in solving that one problem. This is Napoleonic through and through. Napoleon was a master at this, especially on the battlefield. He would allocate, literally militarily, he would allocate all of his, or a huge portion of his force, his artillery, his men, on one part of the opposing army, because most of the time he would go up against larger forces with more manpower and gunpowder. He would focus let's say he has 100,000 men. He would focus that 100,000 men. If he were up against 200,000 men, he would focus that 100,000 men on one side of the opposing army. He would defeat that side, and then he would be able to turn around and fight the other remaining side of the oppositional force and then defeat them. But he would concentrate on the problem at hand. Elon Musk also does this, I believe, obviously running multiple insanely valuable companies with, Lord knows how many employees. I've heard that he basically just focuses, he goes from company to company, focuses on the problem that he needs to solve right there, solves it, moves to the next company, solves the most pressing issue, moves to the next company, solves the most pressing issue. Define your primary problem and invest your energy and focus in solving that one problem. And then you move on. That is so powerful and convicting in my own life for sure. Number 14, great ones have the ability to start over. This goes back to the idea of being utterly unself-conscious and not taking yourself too seriously. The ability to look foolish and keep moving. James Dyson, fantastic example, created 5,127 prototypes of the Dyson vacuum. I think it took him 14 years, but he kept on going. He kept on iterating, and then obviously, maybe not obviously, but now he's worth like $14 billion, so it worked. But the great ones have the ability to start over. That's a powerful, powerful lesson. If you've been listening to the shows for a long time, the name originally of the podcast was the Tyro Experience. Tyro means novice or beginner. And so it's the ability to have that Tyro mindset of being okay needing to start over, being okay looking foolish or looking like a beginner, especially in the context of something that you don't know much about, that you want to know more about. Number 15, inspiration is perishable. Act on it immediately. Number 1, I think this goes back to the first sentence, that the overscheduled life is not worth living. If the more control, and obviously there's a degree of luxury that comes with that. With monetary success, you get more control over your schedule. You have more schedule and time freedom. I think the important lesson here is optimizing for freedom, like Sam Zell said. I think creating space for downloads from God, to talk with God, to listen to your intuition with reduced noise, carry a journal, go on walks without music, go lay in the park without music, go lay outside in the sun with no music, go work out with no music, go do things with as little noise as possible so that you can actually hear what God's trying to say, and then carry a journal so you can write these ideas down and then act on them as immediately as possible. Most inspiration gets stifled because of lack of freedom. which I think is sad because I believe God gives us inspiration to give us insights or indicators of what he wants us to be working on or what we should be working on. And my friend Noah Ryan, who I've had on the podcast several times, episode 70, I believe, was his most recent one. He tweeted something about the idea that like they don't want you to know that you can just create the life that you want. And he's done a phenomenal job of that. Like the idea of lifestyle design, where you really can. It just takes a lot of time and it's risky, but it literally can happen. You can create the life that you want, where you can actually create the space and freedom to act on these inspirations. Number 16, early in life, you're looking for opportunities. So you're saying yes to everything. That is the exploration phase. When you've found the thing you want to work on, you enter the exploitation phase, and you have to say no to everything by default. So the idea there is explore, then exploit. I believe that most people don't explore. Most people are completely indoctrinated by institutions in the West, I'll say. Most people are completely indoctrinated by institutions from the time they're born. They're raised, they're children, they're curious. They live with this like awe and wonder about the world. Then they go to elementary school, they begin to get indoctrinated. Then you go to middle school, you get more indoctrinated. Then you go to high school, you get more indoctrinated. Then you go to college, you get even more indoctrinated. Then you don't even spend any time outside of college other than maybe a gap year. And then you go to an organization or a corporate job where you get even further indoctrinated. And then you wake up and you're 45 and you've just been indoctrinated for 45 years and you didn't even explore. I mean, it works for a lot of people, but I don't think it's the optimal way to live. I really do not. I think that, as he said, your natural state is freedom. I believe the same thing for me. Naval encourages us to explore, then exploit. I also believe the machine doesn't want you to explore. The machine wants to exploit you. The machine would much rather you be a cog in the machine than to build your own machine, because then that's a competitor. I firmly believe that you have to explore, and this also goes back to the idea of iterations and failing and learning, and big winners pay for many experiments. If you explore or experiment with where you live, what you do, who you do it with, then you get data. And then when you get data, you can make better decisions and you can get closer and closer and closer to your actual purpose in life and what God's called you to do. There's this idea that I've heard before where, and this is the interesting thing. There's no right way. I guess we're all just hedging our bets on our life. Like our philosophy will be proven incorrect or correct or useful or non-useful in the end. But on this podcast, you and I are we're exploring what that philosophy is, what we actually want to do with our lives and how to become sovereign. There's this idea that I heard that in your 20s, you should try everything. In your 30s, you should figure out what you're good at. And in your 40s, you should make money off it. I think it's a very interesting idea because there's also this idea that I read, I believe it was in Think and Grow Rich, that the average man does not reach his intellectual peak until he's like 55, mid 50s, which is incredible. And you might think that's a little late or maybe exaggerative. But Sam Walton was in his mid 40s when he started Walmart. James Dyson was 41 when he started Dyson. Estee Lauder was 38 when she started Estee Lauder. Dietrich Mateschitz was 39 or 41 when he started Red Bull. The KFC guy was like 62. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on and on about these people that they didn't just wake up when they were 20 years old and know exactly what they wanted to do. I think that's a very unlikely experience. There are people who do that, no doubt about it. There's people that were given a certain specific direction in life at a very young age, but I would say the vast majority of us, that's not the case. And Naval would encourage us to explore and then exploit. Explore the terrain and then decide wholeheartedly, once you have enough data, make the courageous decision and then fully commit. Explore, then exploit. And then when you start to exploit, you have to say no to everything because definitionally, if you're committed, you have to say no to other things that are not improving the thing that you're committed to. Number 17, you only have to be right a few times or even just once to get the big score. So back to the big winners pay for many failed experiments. That's a hugely important lesson in my life recently. I think that's incredibly important. Amazon, we did Jeff Bezos last week. You and I, we studied him. He experimented and explored immensely even while he was building Amazon. They would acquire companies with certain technologies. They would try to invent certain technologies. And the reason you've never heard of most of them is because most of them failed and most of them cost billions of dollars. You might have heard of the Kindle. You might have heard of Amazon Web Services. Those are two big winners that now reap Amazon hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue a year. And those hundreds of billions of dollars actually pay for the hundreds or thousands of failed experiments that happen in Amazon at the same time. But you have to experiment to find the big winners. And I think that that's a massive lesson. It compounds as well. You have to stay in the game. You have to keep moving and move resolutely forward, as Teddy Roosevelt would say, because if you leave the game, then the results don't compound. You only have to be right a few times or even just once to get the big score. Man, powerful. Number 18, always overpay. Pay them like they're the best and expect the best. This is a lesson that I got from David Sinner and Founders, but the dynamic range of people is extremely important to consider. The most talented person can do not just 1 or 2 times the second or third most. They can do 50 to 100 to 1,000 times more than the next best person. The dynamic range of people is not like a CRM or Hulu and Netflix. They're like, those are marginally different, even if they're different at all, if they are different at all. Human beings are not that way. The other thing is you get what you expect, not what you want. There's this coach when I was in college playing baseball. We had a performance coach come in and speak to us, and he said, you do not get the standards that you set or the standards that you lead by as a leader. You get the standards that you tolerate. You get the standards that you tolerate. You get the things that you expect. What you expect to happen is what you get. So if you pay somebody like they're the best and then expect them to be the best, very often they will meet your expectations. Number 19, cut your losses quickly in relationships, jobs, and locations. Most regrets in life are from staying too long in either of those 3 things. Most regrets in life are from staying too long in a location that you don't like, a job that you either don't like or tolerate, or a relationship that you know that you should leave. Cut your losses quickly in relationships, jobs, and locations. Most regrets are from staying too long. And I think most of the time we know it too. That's the thing. And then there's this dissonance in our minds and in our hearts and in our lives. There's a lack of coherence because maybe we know we should be doing something, but we're not doing it. And then there's just this weird sort of distrust within ourselves. Cut your losses quickly in relationships, jobs, and locations. Number 20, we're on to mental clarity, anxiety, and peace. By definition, I guess this is actually, see, this is what I mean. It could be either or, but we're going to actually include this in the one previous. By definition, if you're learning, you're going to be wrong most of the time. Learning is error correction. That's literally what it is. So definitionally, if you are learning, if you are improving, you're going to be wrong. Because if you're not wrong, then you're the same. And if you're the same, you're not improving. That's how it is. If you can't find anything to improve upon, you're lying to yourself, is another way of saying that. Another example of being willing and able and tolerant of looking like a fool in certain contexts. Number 21, if you are so smart, why aren't you happy? This one was interesting for me because I'm not sure happiness is my goal. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's not. I think he's more so speaking to like these people that are so intelligent and living miserably. I think there's a difference between like, I think that's bad. Like, if you're so smart, then why are you miserable? But I'm not so sure that happiness is my actual goal. I think happiness is sort of like a byproduct of living a good life, and it will come and go, and there will be seasons of joy and seasons of pain and seasons of joy and seasons of pain. But if you're seeking happiness, I think that's how a lot of bad addictions and less than beneficial habits are created, if you're just seeking happiness all the time. Something to ask yourself though, but it is an interesting point. If you are so smart, if you know so much, if you're so wise, why are you miserable? Number 22, imagine how effective you'd be if you weren't anxious all the time. This goes back, I mean, a lot of anxiety is worrying about things that you have no control over. So if you take the advice earlier on in this podcast of just reducing the amount of things that you even care about, then you'll have less anxiety. Because if I care about 100 things and I can't control 70 of them, but I still care about those 70 things because I've identified them as problems and things that need to be fixed, but I have no effect on them, that's 70 things that I can't impact that cause me anxiety and worry. So an easy way to do that is just not be anxious about those things. Stop identifying them as problems. Stop identifying them as things that you even think about or care about. And the note I wrote was, don't worry, but how? And what I came to the conclusion of is act faithfully. Action, I really believe this with John D. Rockefeller, action solves everything because it's positive momentum. It's very difficult to be anxious while you're making direct positive momentum in the direction that you want to go. And the only way to make positive momentum is to act, is to take action. So act faithfully. I think the faithfully part comes into play because you have to have faith that the things that you don't have effect over will work themselves out, and you surrender those to God. Acting faithfully is the understanding that the actions that you're taking, if you're really honest with yourself, are in alignment with God's calling for you. I think it's impossible to act faithfully if that's not the case, because then you're basically just living in dissonance and incoherence with your life. Imagine how effective you'd be if you weren't anxious all the time. Remove the things that you can be anxious about. I think that's it's almost overly simplistic, but it's a massive lesson. You can just decide not to care about something. I really believe that. You can just decide not to care about what people are doing in Washington, or what's happening in Ukraine, or wherever the hell else. Like, you can just decide these things. You could decide not to care about what's happening down the street from you if you wanted. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't care about anything, but I think you should be intentional. I think you and I should be intentional about what we actually care about, so that the things that we don't actually care about don't cause us any anxiety or worry, and we can focus all of our resources, energy, focus, time, and money on the things we do care about, and then we can be effectual in those endeavors. Imagine how effective you'd be if you weren't anxious all the time. Number 23, mental stress is when you have two conflicting desires at once. Acknowledge the conflict and choose which desire to let go of. So decision, as far as I understand, literally means to kill off. It is to decide. Like, you think about the word homicide, which is to kill. Fratricide is to kill one of your own members. Suicide is to kill yourself. Side is, I believe the root is in Latin, and it means like to die or to kill. Decide is to kill off. So when you decide to let go of something, you're killing off that option. And I think he's saying, well, what he literally is saying is mental stress is when you have two conflicting desires at once. Acknowledge the conflict and choose which desire to let go of. The important thing there, a very important note, is he says acknowledge the conflict. He's not saying act like it's not there and just move on and act like it's not a problem. No, if you have two acknowledge or conflicting desires, say maybe you want to live where you're living, but you also would like to move somewhere. Holding those conflicting desires in place at the same time, that's going to cause you stress because they're at odds. The way to do that is to just acknowledge that there is a conflict between these two thoughts, and then just make the courageous decision of which one to let go of. Maybe it's, you know what? I need to be here. My family's here. I need to take care of my family. My job is good. I actually really enjoy the people that I work with and that I work around, or that I live around. And then I'm just going to let go of the idea of moving. Or maybe it's like, dude, I actually hate my job. I hate where I live. I hate this, blah, blah, blah. I actually want to move closer to family. Then decide which one to let go, and then take action towards the one that you decide not to let go of, and you will remove much of your mental anguish. Number 24, anxiety is pervasive stress due to unresolved problems. It piles up because we move through life without observing our own reactions to problems, and we don't resolve them. So, I mean, this is not meant to be overly simplistic either, but if you have a problem that needs to be resolved that's causing you anxiety, the way to alleviate that anxiety is to resolve the problem, not run from it. Or, here's another thing. I mean, this is a pervading sentiment throughout this podcast thus far, or you could just not identify it as a problem, and then bam, I don't have to think about it being a problem. It just is. He also goes on to say, a lot of emotional energy is spent reacting to things your mind is automatically labeling as problems. You don't need so many problems. That's powerful. Very powerful. You don't need so many problems. In reality, you need like one or two or three that you focus all of your time, energy, and focus on, so that you can actually be effectual in those problems, in those endeavors, in the things that you really care about. You don't need 100 problems. We do not need 100 problems. Oh, what should I wear? What should I do with my hair? What should I eat? Where should I go get a coffee? Where should I work? Where should I do this? What's going on with politics? What's going on with Ukraine? What's going on in Europe? What's going on with the border? What's going on? Blah, 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 blah. We do not need so many problems. That does not mean don't be aware, but we do not need to label all of these things as problems. That takes up so much mental energy. He literally says a lot of emotional energy is spent reacting to things your mind is automatically labeling as problems. We do not need that many problems. And I think that just imagine the weight that gets lifted off your shoulders if you just walk through life. And I really think that it's important to iterate here. This is not saying, I don't think he's saying to be some like monk, agnostic to life person that's just like living in a cave. Oh, I don't care. I'm just going to live whimsically. Woo! Smoke some weed, chill out, go to the beach. I think he's saying you have to pick your problems wisely and not just automatically assume all the problems that people around you or the news or the world is telling you are problems. I think you can walk through life and disregard many of the problems that other people identify as problems. And then you can actually be effectual in the ones that you want to be effectual in. Man, I love that advice. Anxiety is pervasive stress due to unresolved problems. It piles up because we move through life without observing our own reaction to problems, and we don't resolve them. Resolve the problem, your anxiety goes away. Don't identify the problem as a problem, and you don't have anxiety about it. Bam. You don't need so many problems. Okay, so now we're in the section about wealth, scale, and value creation. This is an interesting section for sure. Number 25. You have to be able to delete text messages and delete emails without flinching if you want to scale. This is something that's been interesting for me to internalize because I've often felt throughout my life like I don't want to be rude to people. I don't want to, if this person took the time to reach out to me, I don't want to be rude. I don't want to neglect their message or make it seem like I'm just ignoring them, because I also think about it in conversation. Like if I was talking to somebody face to face and they said something to me and I just flat out ignored them, I think that would be rude, and that would be a bad thing to do in most cases. Texting, as the barrier to communicate has gotten thinner and thinner and thinner and easier to overcome, I think this is actually extremely important. He goes on to say, if you wouldn't ask somebody else to do it and then you get that request yourself from someone else, you can just dismiss it. You don't have to respond. This is very freeing to me. I have another friend who I asked him, I'm like, because it's interesting. We assume that we have to respond to everybody. One of my best friends in the world, he won't respond to my text. I won't respond to his text. And then we'll talk for like an hour and a half every time we talk. We have a great relationship. I was talking to him and I asked him like how he does that. Like what's his thought process there? He said, I have set the standard with myself that I do not have to respond to every text. And I think I understand that as his friend. And I think he understands, and people that I'm around understand that about me, and I understand that about them. If you set the standard and you actually live by it, then people understand that it's not a personal thing. If you're responding to every request that comes your way, then it's just going to be too distracting. That's just the reality of it. So you don't owe most people anything. I firmly believe that. Most people, you do not owe anything. And if you set standards for communication, at least early on in a friendship, you could even have a conversation, but hey man, just want you to know I'm not going to be like super responsive over text. If you need something urgently, give me a call and we'll figure it out. Or hey man, I actually would prefer text. Let's get on a text chain and we can hash it out. Or man, I don't use email, so I'm not going to email. But if you set standards for communication and actually live by them, I think people will be more understanding and more gracious if you don't respond. I also think this is for you and for me. One thing that internalizing this has done for me is to not text people stupid requests. If it's something I can look up, take 20 extra seconds or 2 minutes or 5 minutes and do it yourself instead of taking somebody else's time and distracting them from what they're doing. Take on that responsibility yourself. This was a really important thing for me. I just think you don't have to respond. And I really like that idea. It's freeing that you have to be able to delete text messages and delete emails without flinching if you want to scale. It's not personal. I don't think you should be rude, and I think that you know when you're being rude. But it's important advice. Number 26, money solves money problems. You often hear money doesn't buy happiness, or money does buy happiness, or whatever. Regardless of what you think there, money does solve money problems, and money problems are very real. But they are not the only problems. It also doesn't solve other problems. It doesn't solve spiritual problems. It doesn't solve relational problems. It doesn't solve health problems sometimes. But it does solve money problems, and money problems are very real problems. It provides you with freedom. Money provides you with freedom if you detach from it, which allows you to solve other problems as well. It's a luxury for sure. It's also not a demon. I think a lot of Christians in particular, there's poverty gospel and there's prosperity gospel. We hear much more about prosperity gospel and the idea that, oh, look at these pastors like using scripture to get rich and like whatever. Like that's one side of the spectrum. There's also, this is a really interesting idea that was presented to me by my friend Nick, who I respect and admire greatly. He brought up the idea of poverty gospel. I'd never really heard of it. But it's this complete neglect of money, and like it's evil. But here's an interesting thing. As far as I understand it, there's a Bible verse that says a Bible verse that gets quoted a lot that says money is the root of all evil. As far as I'm going to look it up actually. Okay, so 1 Timothy 6:10. You will hear this verse quoted or used that money is the root of all evil or all kinds of evil. That is incorrect. The verse is, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It's not money itself. God gave us money. It's something that he created and gave us. It's not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. And I believe that to be true. But money does solve money problems. Money does give you freedom if you detach from it, which allows you to solve other problems and to live your life on more sovereign terms. Number 27, it's never been easier to create wealth. It's still difficult, but it's never been easier. This reminds me of an Alex Hormozy quote that I've mentioned before on the podcast, but it's never been easier to be successful, but it's also never been easier to be distracted. We live in an age of infinite opportunity. There is so much opportunity with content creation and coding and technology and access and connection. Infinite opportunity, which opens the door to infinite distraction. It's the two sides of the sword. You can't have one without the other. That's just the way it is. It's the yin and yang. But with more opportunity comes more distraction. So I think the better we get at saying no to things, the better we get at saying no to distractions, the better we get at focusing our time on the things that we genuinely want and desire to focus on, not things that the world tells us we have to focus on, or not things that are algorithmically designed and engineered with billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars behind them to make us think that we want them, like Instagram or like social media and whatnot. The better we can get at saying no to those distractions, the more we will be able to leverage and take advantage of the infinite opportunity that we live in today. That's a freaking awesome. I love that. Because we do live in, it's not doom and gloom. I hate this idea that like the world sucks, blah, 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 blah. Like social media is so bad, it's addicting. Yeah, guess what, dude? You're living in this world. Literally, this is funny. I met a guy named Jonathan the other day, who's CEO and founder of a really, really cool company. He said, Fido, F it, drive on. And so to those people that say this is like doom and gloom and we're in the end times, yeah, shut up. F it, drive on, dude. You literally live in this world. Esther 4:14, which I will bring up here in a little bit, but it's perhaps you were brought to the kingdom for such a time as this. We live in an age of infinite opportunity. How amazing is that? Yes, there comes distractions with that, but that's just part of the game. You cannot have one without the other. I just think we should get good and competent at saying no and removing distractions. I think that's what Naval's saying as well. Number 28, wealth is better than status. Wealth creation games are positive sum. Status games are not. So wealth creation, if you think about it, unless you are lying, unless you are just a complete degenerate shithead and you're just a liar and a bad person, creating wealth is actually a representation, or it's directly correlated to the value that you provide. Think about iPhone. Think about Apple. It's the most valuable company that's ever existed. That's because everybody has an iPhone. And the reason everybody has an iPhone is because it makes their life better. Everybody has a MacBook because it makes their life better. Everybody has AirPods and iPods and whatnot. The value that they provided is representative of the value of the company, the value of the business. When you create wealth in an ethical, moral, and upright way, you are being rewarded for the value that you provide the marketplace. That could be a product, it could be a service, whatever it is. If you create a product that is not valuable and you try to sell it, you're not going to make that much income unless you lie and you manipulate, which in the end, you will not be blessed. That's just the way of the world. Nobody ever got away with anything. So build a business, build wealth, create wealth. But I think it's also important not to focus on the creation of wealth, because that's sort of putting the cart before the horse. Focus on creating value. My mentor, Bobby, said this to me, that when you focus, and here actually, take a step back. Sorry, I'm getting excited. Sam Walton, Jeff Bezos, two of the wealthiest people to ever exist, two of the wealthiest, most high-value companies ever to exist, were two of the most customer-obsessed individuals to ever live. It drove every single one of their decision makings in building their business. They were obsessed with the customer, not with their shareholders, not with their partners, not with the manufacturers, not with their small mom and pop competitors in local towns. They were obsessed with the customer. What can the customer get? How cheaply or affordably can he get it? And it's obviously nuanced, but they were so obsessed with the value to the end user. They created a product that was immensely valuable and they got rewarded for it. That's just how it is. Creating wealth creates value. Status does not. Status is not, it's not as important as it used to be. And it's a net zero game. It's a zero sum game, because if you gain status and I gain status, that means other people have to gain status or have to lose status, because it's a ranking system. Do not, and this is the thing too with social media. People are like, oh, I have 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 subscribers. That really doesn't mean much. It's a weightless metric in a lot of ways. Yeah, it'll get you invited to some parties and maybe it'll get you invited backstage at like Coachella or whatever, but it doesn't actually like really do anything. Like, you're not providing value. If you are not providing value and you have high status, then I believe you will confront yourself in a tumultuous state later down the line. I would rather create value and then be rewarded by wealth later instead of chasing status now. Number 29, find what feels like play to you but looks like work to others. This might be the most important sentence in the entire podcast. Find what feels like play to you but looks like work to others. Once again, the Sam Zell quote, go for freedom, because if you go for freedom, you control what you work on. If you control what you work on, you do what you love. In the end, you'll be rewarded for it because you'll get really good at it. John D. Rockefeller had the same idea. He was like, hey, look, if I like doing this, I'm going to do it. And then if I don't like doing that, I'm going to hire somebody that likes doing that, because if I hire somebody that likes doing that, they'll be better than me at it. And then if they find something that they don't like, they'll hire somebody that likes doing the thing that they don't like, because then everybody's doing things that they like. And if you build an organization or a family or a community of people that are contributing in ways that they actually enjoy and that they like, that's going to be a way more productive community or organization than if it was a bunch of people just doing things they hate. Charlie Munger also has this idea that like if you compete against somebody who's like genuinely interested in something and you're not, you're just going to get beat, and you should just not play that game because you're going to lose in the long run. It's how it goes. Find what feels like play to you but looks like work to others. That also goes back to the idea that you have to explore, because you can't find something if you're not exploring. Number 30, you escape competition through authenticity. You are the only you. You. I mentioned I'd bring up Esther 4:14. Perhaps you were brought to the kingdom for such a time as this. God put you on this earth for a specific reason right now. And I believe, especially in the age of social media, it's so easy to like want to create content. We want to create content that goes like viral or whatever it is. But if it's not authentic to you, then like at the end of the day, you're going to answer to you and God. Like, you're going to answer to God. And if God's like, hey man, you just like lived your whole life as a lie, but hey, you got 1 million followers. Yeah, no interest. Not for me. I would rather be authentic. I would rather not do that. I would rather live an authentic life, true to who I am and who God has called me to be. I would assume that you're the same way. I would assume that you'd rather live an authentic life. And I think what he's saying is you escape competition through authenticity. You escape competition when you don't compete with anybody in terms of like being yourself. If you're yourself and you're doing something that you love and that you're passionate about and that you really, really care about, and you find a way to create value with that thing that you're passionate about, then you're going to win. That's just how it is. It's like a law of physics almost. Okay, so we're into the next section. This is like social human nature type stuff. Number 31. Don't try to impress people who don't care about you. And most people don't care about you. I'm going to say that again. Don't try to impress people who don't care about you. And most people do not care about you. Let that sink in. Stop trying to impress people who do not care about you. And most people do not care about you. Most people you walk in the grocery store who are around you, most people at a restaurant, most people on social media, most people at your job, most people on the street, most people in the gym, they actually don't care about you at all. They don't. So stop trying to impress them. Impress yourself, impress God, and impress your family. See how that goes. I think that's a much more rewarding way to live. That also goes back to the idea of looking foolish. Like I think it's a superpower. Teddy Roosevelt being utterly unselfconscious allowed him to practically live 10 lives, the equivalent of most men, 10 lives of an ordinary man in 60 years, because he was utterly self-conscious. He did not care about starting over. He did not care about being perceived as weird or overly talkative, or he wasn't overly introspective. He just lived his life and did the best that he could. He was willing to look foolish. He was willing to look like a dude when he went out to the Badlands. A dude at that point basically meant like a city slicker that was trying to be a cowboy. He did not care. He did not care at all, because he knew in his heart of hearts that he would work harder than them. He would, or at least just as hard, and he would earn their respect, which he did. And he knew that he would act courageously. Like, so it really does not matter. These, like, most people in the grand scheme of your life literally do not matter. They do not care about you at all. They don't think about you as much as you think they do. They actually probably have never thought about you before. So stop trying to impress them. I think Naval hit that out of the park. That's a phenomenal piece of advice. Number 32, if you want to change someone's behavior, compliment them. If you're driving and you are there's barriers around and you focus on the barrier, you are significantly more likely to get in a wreck with the barrier. If you focus on the path through the barrier, you are much more likely to escape or get through scot-free. What I think that's relevant, because if you give somebody positive feedback, like you can all, I genuinely believe this. I have a couple in my mind, pieces of feedback or compliments that I've gotten that have quite possibly impacted the rest of my life, because they like sparked a level of inspiration or sparked a thought in my mind. We're like, dang, maybe I am good at this, or maybe he's right. Maybe there is a level of like confidence I can have in this arena because of this. But very rarely does a piece of harsh feedback and judgmental feedback improve your life in the long term. Very rarely. It might happen, but I think if you want to change somebody's behavior, compliment them. People would rather be compelled forward by reward than pushed forward by like harsh criticism and things of that sort. So compliment people if you want to change their behavior. 33. Life is always throwing truth back at you. It's about whether you choose to see it, even if it's painful. This reminded me of the idea that truth hurts. It really does sometimes. The truth can hurt, but it sets you free. This was feedback about Jeff Bezos, or description of Jeff Bezos from one of his colleagues. One of the things that he did better than anybody this person had ever worked with was he embraced the truth and he allowed it to inform his actions. Life is throwing truth at you. God is revealing things to you all the time. I believe it's very difficult to decipher what that truth is, especially when there's a bunch of noise and distraction. And oftentimes it's so painful that we just choose to neglect it. But I think Naval's right. If we look for truth and then accept it when it's painful, we'll be much better off in the long run. Number 34, there is a direct correlation between how much you think about yourself and how miserable you are. This is back to the idea of utterly unselfconscious and looking like a fool, being willing to look like a fool, overthinking, overanalyzing, fake humility, analysis by paralysis. It's all a protection mechanism to keep you from trying. Because if I'm thinking about myself constantly, I'm going to find out what's wrong with me, and then I'm only going to be thinking about what's wrong with me because we're fallen, fallible human beings and we have things wrong with us. If I'm always thinking about myself, then I'm not thinking about the people around me, and I'm not thinking about what needs to be done, the higher mission, and I'm not going to do much. Because if I'm always thinking about myself, I'm going to realize my inadequacies, and then I'm going to protect myself from trying. Because when I try, guess what happens? I'll fail. I'll get rejected. The girl will say no. The job will decline my interview. The person will say no to coming on the podcast. The business won't make money. Whatever it is, it's all a protection mechanism to keep you from actually trying and experimenting. I want to also add in, this is obviously nuanced, because he's also saying be utterly self-prioritizing and live life on your terms. There's nuance to it. But I think it's also very important to understand who and why you're making the sacrifices. There's a direct correlation between how much you think about yourself and how miserable you are. I don't know how to do this necessarily, but I think we'd all be better off if we just stopped thinking about ourselves so often. Maybe think about how you could help your brother or your roommate or your mom or your dad or your sister or your girlfriend or your wife or your colleague. Maybe just try to help them, see what's going on, see if you can help them, or see, instead of thinking about, oh, I need this goal to be achieved, think about how that goal being achieved would impact positively the people around you, and then focus on that impact. Because I think that's also it's a more compelling and more powerful motivation as well. Because we all need things bigger than ourselves, and I'll get into a piece of advice about that here soon. Next section, this is the last section of advice. This is about virtue and God. and things of that sort. So 35, living virtuously is optimizing for the long term over the short term. This is having an eternal perspective. This is focusing on things that are timeless. This is focusing things that are beautiful and true. This is understanding the idea of the verse in, I believe it's in Matthew. For what does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? Souls are eternal. It's everlasting. Focus on those things. Focus on the things that are eternal. Focus on the long-term perspectives, the long-term, timeless, beautiful truths, not on short-term. I really believe this. The longer you can expand your time horizon, the better our lives will be. I believe that wholeheartedly in pretty much every single aspect of our life. Number 36, self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself. You earn it by living up to your moral code and doing things for others. It goes back to this idea that making a vow and not committing to it, or falling back on that commitment, or falling short on that commitment, is worse than not making a vow at all. If you try to make promises with yourself about everything, you're going to fall short. This is where you see like people that are neurotic about every single thing they put in their body, every single thing about their house, every single thing about their health has to be so perfect. They become neurotic because they made so many promises with themselves. Oh, I can't eat Cheetos ever. I can't do this ever. I have to sleep on this ever all the time. I can't go here ever. You become neurotic because you're making so many promises with yourself that in order to fulfill them, you can't live an enjoyable life, or at least a free life. You become a slave to those neurotic impulses. Self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself. So be selective about the things that you promise yourself. And then once you promise yourself something, fucking do it. Like, don't fall back on it. If you're promised to yourself, if you make a legitimate promise that I'm going to wake up at this time for the rest of the year, then do it. If you make your promise to yourself to do 75 hard, then do it. But don't just frivolously make promises with yourself, because that erodes your self-esteem over the long run, because you will ultimately not fulfill those promises if you make so many of them. Be selective about your promises to yourself and then keep them. Number 37, I'm holistically selfish in that I want to be objectively successful in everything I set out to want. The idea here, this is the larger premise of my last podcast with Noah Ryan. I think it was episode 70. If you decide to play a game, then you need to win at all costs. Otherwise, do not play. Winston Churchill spoke about this in World War II. He's like, once you enter a war, actually Jocko Willink talks about this as well, but like the idea that if once you enter a war, you have to understand that there's no other option but victory. If you enter a war without being 100% okay, content with the means that are necessary to win that war, you should not go into the war in the first place. You should not play games that you do not want to win. Be selective about the games you play, because if you decide to play it, you need to win. But you don't have to play every game. That's the important thing. You want to play the games that you want to win and then win them. Very important. Number 38, desire is a contract to be unhappy until you get what you want. That's powerful. Desire is a contract to be unhappy until you get what you want. And this is a pervading concept throughout this podcast, but you don't actually want everything. I think we've been psyoped into like this overly materialistic and consumer-minded culture that we have to have the car, we have to have the yacht, we have to have the private plane, we have to have the multiple houses, we have to have all the nice clothes, we have to have the good job, and blah, 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 all this stuff. You don't actually want most of that. The things that you own almost always end up owning you. I firmly believe that. But if you're selective about the things that you own, if you're selective about the games that you want to be playing, if you're selective about your desires, then you won't be unhappy about these frivolous desires not coming to fruition. And then you can focus all of your effort, time, and energy onto fulfilling and bringing forth the desires that you actually want. And then you'll be happy, because then you get the actual things you want. So desire is a contract to be unhappy until you get what you want. You don't actually desire everything that you've been led to believe that you desire. You should be selective about the things that you want. Number 39, happiness is being okay with where you are, not feeling that anything is missing in this moment. So this definition of happiness, if this is his definition of happiness with in regards to that sentiment about if you're so smart, why you're not happy, I agree. I actually agree, because I believe this, basically what he's saying, is wholeness. Being fully content, feeling fully whole, feeling like there is nothing missing in this moment. I would say that's what we're all after. That's why you want the physique. That's why you want the money. That's why you want the car, the girl, the job title, whatever it is. You want it to try to feel whole. And I'm not saying those are wrong. I'm in pursuit of many of those things as well. But I'm reminded by this quote. I think it was C.S. Lewis that said there's something to the effect of there's a God-sized hole in every man's heart. And so I just think understanding that those things will not make us ever feel whole. No amount of money, no amount of followers, no job title, no amount of cars, no amount of yachts or toys or trips or vacations or respect from peers or even the prettiest girlfriend or wife. Nothing will make us feel actually fully whole other than a relationship with God, because I firmly believe that there is a God-sized hole in every man's heart. It's the mark of the Creator. The Creator has created you, and He wants you to be in relationship with Him. I firmly believe that there's a God-sized hole in every man's heart, and happiness or wholeness is accepting that and then being in union with God. Because if you're in union with God in a particular moment, maybe we've all I've had moments in my life where I feel like an immense amount of peace. If we're in touch and with God and we're connected with Him in those moments, that's when I believe we feel the most whole. That's like Naval is saying, that's when we feel like there's nothing missing in this moment. So I think it's worth understanding that money, cars, fame, status, whatever is not going to make you feel whole. Only a relationship with God will do that, in my opinion. Number 40, everyone craves something more important than themselves. If you want to be happy, you have to forget about your personal problems. Bam, what did we just talk about? Everyone craves something that's more important than themselves, a relationship with God, bringing forth the vision that God has called you to bring forth, the kingdom of heaven to earth. Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time, but the idea of voluntary self-sacrifice. We are not enough. You and I are not enough. That's not something you hear a lot. I think a lot of people in today's world, it's like, oh, you're enough. You're okay. You're special. You are enough. Wrong. Incorrect. False. You are not enough. I am not enough to make my life worth it or justified at all. I believe that firmly. What we are after is something that's bigger than ourselves, something that we could literally die for and feel good about. I think maybe it was Nietzsche. I'm going to look this up as well. Yes, Nietzsche said this. I know of no better life purpose than to perish in attempting the great and the impossible, than to perish in the thing that is greater than you, and to perish in than to devote your life to the pursuit or the bringing to fruition of something that is more important than yourself. This is why we admire courage. I did a podcast on an essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson about courage. He posits that the number one trait across humanity that men respect and admire the most is courage. It's the voluntary self-sacrifice on the battlefield. It's the voluntary giving up of my desires for the betterment of others. That's a powerful notion. Everyone craves something more important than themselves. Number 41, the happier you are, the more sustainable your output, which makes you even happier, and you'll outwork everyone else. Back to the idea of finding work that feels like play and looks like work to others. Sam Zell saying, go for freedom. Charlie Munger saying, don't compete with people who are more interested than you in a particular thing. If you can create a life that is sustainable, that you actually enjoy, you will work harder over a longer period of time than anybody else, and you will win in that domain. That's a fact. Number 42, values in a partner are much more important than checklist items. Another verse or another biblical idea is that beauty fades, virtue doesn't. I agree with that completely. It's very easy to get caught up in the sauce of Instagram and all the vanity that is pervasive in our society today. But Naval is saying basically in a partner or a wife, you should be physically attracted, but he's saying that you should care more about her virtue. You should care more about the values that she lives by than by her beauty. I'm not married, but I guess we'll see if that's accurate. I agree with him in principle, though. 43. People have been memed into thinking kids make life worse. Kids make your life better in every way. If you want a built-in meaning to life, have kids. Naval also tweeted something recently about basically society as the battle of the childless versus the children. And I think that's really important because a lot of the people, particularly on the left, are advocating for childlessness or the idea that women empowerment, you don't need to be a mom, you should focus on your career. I reject that entirely. I think being a mother is literally the most beautiful thing any human being can do. Like it's the pinnacle of humanity, creating life. Nothing a man can do will surpass literally creating a life and bringing that life into the world. I think that's the most noble and virtuous thing a woman can do in particular. I don't have kids, but I'm assuming, and I hope to one day have kids to be able to understand this from my dad, what he's told me, and my mom, is that they do make your life exponentially better. They give you meaning that you cannot comprehend. My mom and dad always tell me that it's like, it makes your life harder, for sure. Make sure you have to sacrifice more. You have to do certain things that you perhaps don't want to do, but it makes your life mean more, which is a positive result in my opinion. Andrew Tate actually has a good, he was on some podcast and was talking to some lady about this, where she was saying something about making a lot of money and living in a nice penthouse. And he looks at her and says, hey, look, do you actually think when you're 70 years old that having a nice Mercedes and a couple extra Birkin bags will make you feel happy about your life? And then he tells a story about his grandma. He says, I went to a family reunion recently, and there were 70 people there. 70 people, great-grandchildren, grandchildren, children, all these people, 70 people. And at that reunion was my great-grandmother. And all of these people came from her. They were descendants from her. Do you think that a couple extra Birkin bags are going to mean more or make you feel happy at the end of your life compared to having 70 people look at you and be like, wow, that person is responsible for this? I don't think that's, I think that he's got a great point there. I think that having having children and raising a family is got to be one of the most meaningful things you can do. He goes on to say that God, kids, or mission. Pick at least one, but preferably all three. And then last but not least, sentence number 44. The three decisions that mean the most early on in life: who you're with, what you're doing, and where you live. Who you're with, what you're doing, and where you live. These are the three most important decisions, especially where you live, because where you live impacts your dating prospects, it impacts your job prospects, it impacts your friends, it impacts the environment in which you live, the natural environment or lack thereof that you get to interact with, the weather that you live in, where you live, who you're with, and what you're doing. The advice that came to mind, or the thought that came to mind here, I don't think everybody should move out of their hometown, because some people have fantastic environments. They love their community. They love where they live. Amen. Power to you. I think you should do what you want to do and stay there. I would encourage any young man out there, if you're listening to this and you feel lost or you feel stuck, I think you should move out of your hometown. I think you should pick up and move somewhere that you've felt compelled to move. At the very worst case scenario, you realize you move there and you don't like it, you move back. Your hometown's not going anywhere. And I'm saying that because I've felt that way. I've literally lived through that in my life, where after college I moved back to Atlanta and I just was the most lost and stuck I've ever been. I moved to Austin, my life changed in a very positive way, tangible way. That is an hour and 15 minutes plus of me just rambling. So hope you enjoyed. I found this podcast between Chris Williamson and Naval to be remarkably valuable and thought-provoking. I thought some of the ideas are quite literally paradigm shifting and things that I've already started implementing in my life. I hope this was valuable to you. I'll link the original podcast down in the description. Naval is one of a kind. I really believe that. He also has a great podcast with Joe Rogan like 10 years ago. All that to say, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it valuable. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.